1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Sara Sligar is an author and academic based in Los Angeles, where she teaches English and creative writing as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Southern California. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's in history from the University of Cambridge. Her writing has been published in McSweeney's, Quartz, The Hairpin, and other outlets. Take Me Apart is her first novel. Amy Jo Burns is the author of the memoir Cinderland. Her writing has appeared in the Paris Review Daily, Tin House, Plowshares, Gay Magazine, Electric Literature, Literary Hub, and the Paris Review Daily, and the anthology Not That Bad. Shiner is her debut novel. All right, Sarah and Amy Jo, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Maddie.
All right, I'm going to disappear, and I will let Sarah take it away.
Yeah, okay, cool. So I'll start by reading a few minutes from my novel, Take Me Apart, which looks like this. My bookmark is this actually very cool, like this little specialty cocktail that my publisher made for the book for like a pre-launch event. So that's cool. Anyway, Take Me Apart is a literary suspense novel, a thriller about an archivist who becomes obsessed with solving the mystery of a famous photographer's death 25 years earlier. And so it goes back and forth between the archivist's perspective in the present day and sort of parts of the story that are told through the photographer's documents, things that were left behind in her house when she died. So like her diary entries. She finds a lot of old photographs, so you don't see those in the book, but the book's told through the diary entries, letters, medical records, receipts, kind of everything, anything and everything in between, and we can talk more about that in the discussion maybe. I'm going to read a section that's really early in the book, but it's not like the first pages. So the only really important thing to know, I guess, is that the Kate is the name of the archivist. She's come from New York for this job, like archiving the photographer Miranda Brand's objects, sort of going through her house. She didn't know a lot about the job before coming. She used to be kind of more like a fact checker or copy editor at a newspaper, but left under mysterious circumstances. So she sort of landed in Northern California, is staying with her aunt and uncle for free, which, involves some like interesting family dynamics there. And is working for Miranda's son, Theo, who wants to sell his mother's documents to a library or a university. So the part I'm going to read is like Kate comes home from her first day working at Miranda's house, having met Theo. Things didn't go super well. And she's kind of talking to her aunt and uncle about this and finds out some things about Theo and about rumors in this small town on the coast of Northern California that she didn't know before. I know that sounded like a long explanation, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Dinner that night was served on the screened-in porch at the back of Louise's house, on a shiny wooden table surrounded by hosta and tall rubber plants. The fog had faded by the afternoon, and now the air was warm, windless, nearly sticky. Frank, Louise's preternaturally inoffensive husband, had bought a bottle of champagne and 4 dozen Point Reyes oysters to celebrate Kate's first day at work. Kate had tried oysters before, once or twice, but only on beds of ice and lettuce. These were different, raw and wild, so fresh they were practically squirming in their shells. They slid down her throat in a slip of salt and brine. So, Louise said, clapping her hands together, tell us about the house. The house? It's a house. Kate dropped an empty shell into the discard bowl. A living room, a dining room, a kitchen. Katie, come on. I assume there are bedrooms, too. I didn't see those. You know what I mean. There's not anything to say, Kate said, reaching over to refill her aunt's glass. It's pretty boring. It was true, sort of. After that first uncomfortable meeting, Theo had disappeared upstairs and she had spent the rest of the day alone in the dining room, sneezing dust and pushing boxes around. In addition to the massive quantities of papers and documents, the dining room was full of random objects. Already, Kate had found 18 Lego pieces, 4 melted lipsticks, 3 staplers, 2 rolls of masking tape, a nail gun, and a weird China marionette with a broken arm. More than once, she had put something down only to discover that her fingers were coated in a mysterious sticky substance. Her back ached from bending over. Her eyes were red from squinting. She had spent half an hour going through a thick stack of bent note cards only to determine that they were indeed all blank and could be safely set in the discard pile. Yes, it was boring. Boring, repetitive, and way less fun than watching reruns of Vanderpump Rules on her parents' sofa, which is what she's been doing for a couple months before this. But boredom was like pain. When it was gone, it no longer felt real. 600 note cards took up the same mental space as 60, as 6, as 1. That half hour had already become a millisecond in Kate's memory. The money helped smooth the rough edges. Kate's contract said that on top of her hourly rate, she would receive 0.5% of the proceeds from the sale of any art. Online auction records said Miranda's prints went for anywhere between $60,000 and $900,000. Before entering the Brand house, Kate had assumed she might find a couple prints max and get a nice little bonus of a few $1,000s. But it was quickly becoming apparent that the dining room, crammed as it was with trash, was also full of valuable material. Shortly after setting aside those infuriating note cards, she had found a small photograph in decent condition, the ink dense and shiny, the paper unwarped. It was one of Miranda's nature photographs, a close-up of a leaf's corded vein. That was how it was sometimes in the archive. Big discoveries sandwiched between trash, the day-to-day touching the phenomenal. Now she felt drunk on the knowledge that she had earned real money for real work. She had felt so worthless for so long that the mere fact of employment was as sharp a relief as taking off a heavy backpack at the end of a long hike, even if her boss was a dickwad. It can't be all boring, Louise said. Everyone wants to get inside that house. Now you're in there. Give us some details. Honey, leave her alone, Frank said. She can't tell us anything. She signed that agreement. The agreement doesn't apply to family, Louise said. Frank was swallowing oysters like a happy hour special was about to end. Like Louise, he had taken to retirement with gusto, spending his days tinkering with CB radios and kayaking around the lagoon. Instead of a tan, his skin had adopted a permanent pinkish sheen. Even now, in the lilac dust, he wore his wraparound sunglasses hooked on backward, like they were shielding another set of eyes in the back of his head. You'll get your behind the scenes sooner or later, he said to his wife. Anyway, what do you think the guy's going to do? Come right out and say he killed his mom? Kate spat out a mouthful of champagne. Frank, Louise exclaimed, jumping up with her napkin as Kate coughed and coughed. What? What did I do? Louise glared at her husband as she pressed the napkin onto the tablecloth. Have some sensitivity. Frank looked bewildered. You didn't tell her? I thought that was your whole thing. It's not my thing. Okay, your friend's thing. Katie, do you need any water? I'm fine, Kate said, still coughing. I was surprised. Ignore Frank, Louise said. He's trying to stir the pot. It's more a joke than anything, Frank said uncertainly. He fidgeted his sunglasses up and down on the back of his head. It's not a joke, Louise said. Poor thing. He was a little boy. If he shot her, it was obviously an accident. I'm sorry, back up, Kate said. What do you mean if he shot her? I thought Miranda committed suicide. She did, Louise said, just as Frank waggled his eyebrows and said, so they say. Kate gritted her teeth. Everything I read says she killed herself. Her aunt and uncle exchanged looks. Louise sighed. The police ruled it a suicide, she said, but only after they made a huge stink about it. They interrogated a bunch of people in town. Obviously, we didn't live here at the time, but my friend Roberta said the place was swarming with cops. And my friend, Victor, Frank said, was one of the detectives on the case. According to him, they treated it as a full homicide investigation. They didn't think she could have done it herself. Something about the forensic evidence, like on CSI. There's all kinds of theories, Louise said, talking more quickly now. She had resisted this course of conversation, but now that they were on it, she was going to lead the charge. I mean, number one, Jake. Obviously. It's always the husband. If you watch Lifetime, you know. Not that I watch Lifetime. People say Jake just because they have to, Frank said, but everyone who knew him swears he was the nicest guy you ever met. That's what they always say about serial killers, Louise said. Oh yeah, Frank said, remembering. That's another idea. The Zodiac killer. You know, he was never caught. So basically, Kate said deadpan, Miranda Brand was killed by Theo, Jake, or the Zodiac killer. Okay, I'm going to stop there. It's a little more comedic than some of the other sections in the book, but I think a taste of the energy. Amy, I'm so excited to hear you read.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to say I was lucky enough to read an early copy of Take Me Apart, and I was so excited for it to come out because I loved it, and I've told all my friends about it. It's the sort of book I've been mentioning to everybody because I just loved it.
Oh, yay. That makes me so happy. Mm-hmm. I just finished Shiner today, by the way. I have my copy right here. I'm so excited. I feel the same way. I'm really excited to talk to you. Okay, I want to hear it.
Sure. So this is Shiner. I will tell you a little bit about what it's about before I read. But so Shiner is the story of a 15-year-old girl named Ren, and she lives a really secluded life in the mountains of West Virginia with her parents, and her father became a local legend when he was young, and he got struck by lightning, and he becomes this preacher who takes up serpents. And one summer, Ren witnesses him perform this really strange miracle that goes terribly wrong, and as a result of that, all of her family's secrets start to unravel. And so the story is told from Ren's perspective, as well as a lovelorn moonshiner and a reclusive housewife. And those three voices work together to tell the true story that has always been hiding behind this mountain legend. So I'd love to read some of it for you. I'm going to just read the prologue, which is short, and it's titled True Story. Making good moonshine isn't that different from telling a good story, and no one tells a story like a woman. She knows that legends and liquor are best spun from the back of a pickup truck after nightfall, just as she knows to tell a story slowly, the way whiskey drips through a sieve. Moonshine earned its name from spending its life concealed in the dark, and no one understands that fate more than I do. Beyond these hills, my people are known for the kick in their liquor and the poverty in their hearts. Overdoses, opioids, unemployment. Folks prefer us this way, dumb-mouthed with yellow teeth and cigarettes, dumb-minded with carboys of whiskey and broken-backed Bibles. But that's not the real story. Here's what hides behind the beauty line along West Virginia's highways, a fear that God has forgotten us. We live in the wasteland that coal has built, where trains eat miles of track. Our men slip serpents through their fingers on Sunday mornings and pray for God to show himself, while our wives wash their husbands' underpants. Here's what hides behind my beauty line. My father wasn't just one of these men. He was the best. Since word of his sin spilled down the mountain, folks have split from the highway, hoping to catch a glimpse of a fallen hero. They believe that this miner's outpost, shriveled since the coal barons claimed it 40 years ago in the 1970s, still holds the key to my father's miracles. Welcome to Trap, the new sign outside city limits says. What it doesn't? Come here to fall in love. Come here to fear for your life. Strangers ask what I can tell them about the snake handler and his wife. They want myths and legends. They aren't tempted by the truth. It's a true story, I begin, roosting in the back of an old truck. I swear it. Then I tell them that these woods can turn eerie or romantic, depending on the company you keep. It's an autumn night and the fire is lit. Moonshiners sneak in their final runs of whiskey while young women like me tell old tales. The sun sets early. Along the outskirts of Trap, you'll find me standing in a constellation of four-wheel drive trucks in the woods behind the old Saw Wet Motel. The mountains hover at my back. The story of the snake handler's daughter began when I just turned 15. I knew little then of the outside world my father kept from me. Ours is an oral civilization, I used to hear him say, and it's dying. He blamed coal, he blamed heroin, he never blamed himself. He thought he had the only tales worth telling, and he never understood what my mother had run from all her life because she'd been born a woman. The truth turns sour if it idles too long in our mouths. Stories, like bottles of shine, are meant to be given away.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I really love reading or hearing the prologue again after reading the rest of the book, because I felt like when I first read it at the very beginning of the book, it conjured this this setting just so perfectly and so beautifully. And there's also such a tone of the kind of folkloric nature that just came, it just in terms of setting the tone and the voice, it was so wonderful. But then also now, listening back to it after having read the book, don't worry, I won't give any spoilers to anyone else. But I think that there's references to things that I didn't fully pick up on. I feel like when I first read it, it's cool. The discussion of the father's sin, for example. I hadn't really noticed the first time through when I read it, hadn't jumped out to me, and then hearing you read it again, it really does. So it's really exciting. It's cool.
I will jump in with questions because I have a list of them for you. Because I think, when I read thrillers, I always have this experience where it just feels like you're turning the pages, and then when you're done, you kind of set it aside and you move on. But your book was something that stuck with me and just went so deep for so many reasons. So to me, it's just a thriller that has hearts and smarts. And but I think one of the reasons that is because of the characters. I mean, so we're seeing them through your writing, but we're also seeing characters through the things that they've left behind, through the eyes of other characters. And I would love to know how these characters first came to you in whatever way.
Yeah, that's a great question. And also it was interesting because I was working on a new project today and was thinking how do I come up with character? I was just sort of trying to remember.
When you figure it out, let me know.
Yeah, exactly. I'm I don't, but I will say that definitely, that question of, because parts of it are told through Miranda's entries and through letters written to her. And also a lot of it is about the kind of inherited or received narrative that we meaning the collective public imagination in this fictional world have about this artist's life. I was very conscious of the ways in which a character's identity might be interpreted differently and presented differently through those different perspectives. And how, that there are also for example, there are a lot of things that Miranda knows about herself that people from the outside don't know about her, obviously. But there are also things that Kate kind of digging into her items, knowing the sort of myth that surrounds her. There's kind of a perspective on Miranda that Kate also has. And so I feel it was a little bit trying to create the feeling of triangulating a character, right? I love that feeling when you're reading a book and you are suddenly taken into another character's perspective and you're suddenly this thing makes so much more sense to me now, or suddenly this person is more complex than I even imagined. I really felt that way with the mother character in your book. So I would also love to hear you talk about Ruby and how you created her, because we see her first through her daughter's perspective, and then we kind of see her through Flynn's perspective, who's in love with her. Or is that, I don't know if that's the second, and then we also, see her perspective through her friendship with Ivy. And I just got such a different sense of her every time. Was there one perspective that you started off with?
Yes, I did. I started with Wren, the daughter, kind of looking at her mother and only being able to see her mother as a mother and not kind of realizing that before Ruby became a mom, she had this really vibrant life and she had to make really difficult choices. And, I think when I started writing Shiner, I really wanted to write a book about what it feels like to be misunderstood, especially by the people who are closest to you. And I really wanted to write about what it feels like to be a woman who has a story that has gone unheard and what a burden that is. And then on the other hand, to also show what a gift it is to bear witness to somebody else's story. So Ruby sort of came to me, I think, first through all the questions that Ren had. And I think that that's really natural and relatable to kind of as you age to look at your mother and be like, I just have all these questions about what her life was like. So for a long time when I was writing, I think Ruby just existed in absence because the world in which Shiner happens on this mountain, women have to live kind of in between very narrow lines. And because of that, there's so much that their husbands don't know about them. Their children don't know about them. And these women are carrying these like juicy secrets around that nobody knows. And part of the story and part of the journey these characters going through are like, keeping secrets and then trying to decide at what point is it okay and is it right to start sharing them, after they've aged and are kind of looking back on their lives. So I think that Ruby represents for me the question of what becomes of a woman when she does decide to become a mother, especially when she's sort of like stuck in this very traditional religious situation. So it took some time because she wasn't on the page very much because I wanted it to kind of be a book about her absence, But then that wasn't enough because I think what I realized over time was that I was like, I'm hungry for Ruby's story. Like, I want to know who she was. And that became, I think, as I was growing in that way, the book sort of grew that way as well, So it's
I had this feeling when reading it, it was almost like Ruby wasn't even consciously trying to keep these secrets, but because nobody had ever asked, right? And because of the dynamics of her marriage and her position and being really secluded from the rest of people. But it was sort of this sense of because I guess if we're just talking about Ren and Ruby, mother and daughter together, it seems that Ren she doesn't even know that there are other questions for her to ask. And as a result, Ruby hasn't really felt the need to tell her or hasn't felt welcome to tell her. Did you think of Ruby as a secretive character, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I think what it is for her is that she's been taught that silence is survival. And what I wanted to do was show the cost that has, not just for somebody like Ruby, who's a mom, but it's a cost on her community, on her daughter. When we don't let women tell their stories, there's a real fallout and some real consequences. So I wanted to show the consequences as much as the life that can come when you are able to share your stories in a way where you're not afraid of, retribution or anything like that. So that was a little tricky to figure out how to pull off, both sides of that story. But I do think that for a long time, women have been told they can't tell their difficult stories. And I think I wanted to really reckon with what happens, what's the cost of that, but then to also create a storyline where Ren doesn't have to play by those rules, and her mom doesn't want her to play by those rules. And that's kind of where a sense of hope comes from. But, I think part of it is because it's very particular to the place where the book occurs, this mountain, and who's in power. And, I was thinking when I read Take Me Apart, one of the great things about it is the landscape and the setting And, I think that for both of us, like landscape sort of plays a big role in either setting the tone or it's kind of its own character. And, the town that Take Me Apart takes place in, it's, this like eerie, intimate place. It's kind of like an archive itself.
Mm.
And, I would love to know what do you feel like the landscape was like saying to you as you were writing it? Were you recalling things that you've lived? Were you kind of creating something so it would have this space around the archive? Or I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, the sort of setting definitely came to me like really early on, probably like the first two things that really coalesced about the book in my mind and that stayed pretty stable throughout were like the archival format and that question of like investigating these things that people leave behind, and the kind of conflicting perspectives and narratives. So that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, this setting, this kind of atmosphere. Part of it was like at the time that I started thinking about it, there weren't a ton of like thrillers and sort of kind of like gothic romances, which is a bit what the book is as well, that were set in like California. Like I had read a lot of them that were set in New England, like The Secret History or something like that. And I like loved those, but I was interested in like what would happen if you took a lot of that kind of sublime nature and spookiness, but put it in California, which I think has like this space in the imagination that I think also like when, I now live in Los Angeles. I didn't at the time I was writing it. But I think there is this feeling of California as this like idyllic escape. Like it has a very powerful place in the American imagination. And like both Kate and Miranda are coming from New York, trying to escape very difficult things, come to California feeling like it's going to be this reset, and find out that a lot of the same difficulties continue to pursue them, and also that there's something about, I feel like for me as a writer, it just like adds to the drama of, the narrative of like having these beautiful, it's set in Marin County, in this this area that has like huge cliffs and like crashing oceans and like lagoons, and is just very like kind of overwhelmingly beautiful. And I was interested in like the play between that, and then I guess I would just say about the small community thing, it's based loosely on a town called Callinas, which is sort of known and actually has like recently resurged in the news because of they had this very like specific approach to it says that you're reconnecting. Hopefully I'm not reconnecting.
You're still good, Sarah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Wait for Amy Jo to hop back on.
Okay, cool.
While we wait, maybe do you want to like read another little selection?
Oh, I think she should be right back. But I'm trying to think.
She's coming. I see her coming. Don't
Oh,
worry.
okay, great. Okay, cool. Yeah. But I mean, I can tell, I guess, people a little bit more about where it is set because she has already read it, so she sort of knows. So if you haven't read it, it has this like what I kind of call it like a beach gothic vibe. It's sort of these huge cliffs, these crashing waves, these like redwood forests, and there's something like very kind of eerie and haunting about that beauty. And I think that's kind of the tone that I was hoping to play with throughout the book, and I think is why Amy said that it reminds her a little bit of Shiner. I guess I could say that.
I'm gonna pop in since
okay, great.
Since we have no Amy for the moment.
Okay, I mean, I can read something. I just feel like she'll be able to come back soon, so I don't want to derail the conversation too much.
Let's okay, let me try one more time. Thanks everyone for bearing with us. Yeah, I see her here. I keep inviting her.
Mm.
I wish I had a little like elevator music I could play.
No, I can also text her and tell her to that. I'll just tell her that you're inviting her back. Hey, Amy. I guess if she's here, she sees me doing this. So I don't actually need to text her. Hi, Amy. Okay, well, while you figure that out, I will. I'll tell people about the cover, which is like a short enough thing that won't get like disconnected if Amy pops back on. Does that feel good? I had a better idea. I'll just find a section that describes the setting in a way that will make it clear what Amy and I are talking about before we continue. Because like very early on, Kate. Oh, yay!
Internet cut out. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I feel that I should have just started reading. We're all learning here. I'm learning. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry.
All right. We're good. I'm going away again.
Sorry, everybody.
No, I should have done a better job entertaining us all while we wait.
Oh, please.
But we were talking about the scenery. I was going to say just about the community. It's based on this like very eccentric little community in Northern California that is known for being very retrograde in a lot of ways. Like it's, but in a way that's like very desirable. Also, you know, like they don't have street signs because like you should be able to know where you're going, or they like created all these bylaws that make it really hard to build any new houses at all. So these things that have done a great job like preserving some elements of the community, but have also, you know, maybe created a very insular community that is a little bit, a little bit like a good place, or like a crucible for tensions to emerge.
Yeah. What was it like creating a fictional archive for a fictional character? It was so impressive. I mean, you look at it and it's like the story within a story, you know, it feels real, you know?
Yeah, I certainly wrote a lot of documents that then, you know, didn't make it into like the final version. So trying to figure out, probably the hardest part of it was that I have a lot of experience working in archives and like doing that kind of research. So the formatting and the kind of questions I was interested in is like the way that people talk about themselves, or the types of things you find. Those were like came very naturally to me. But part of what I was like kind of initially interested in doing was being like, well, here's what it's really like, you know, to be in an archive. And the reality is it's like pretty boring a lot of times. And so I had this like, I'm going to show people how boring it is. And then I was like, that's not really like fun to read a book that's boring. And also, you know, it's also hard to advance plot in a way that's also totally realistic to how people actually write in diaries and journals. So there was a lot of trying to like balance, I think, the tone, especially of like Miranda's entries, so that they felt real, but also like were legible. You know, like in the editing process, there were a lot of like lines that my editor was like, this is great, but like, I don't know what it refers to. And I was like, yeah, that's the point. You don't know what it refers to. And then I had to be like, that's actually really not a pleasant reading experience. Like, I totally understand that. Like, we didn't fight about it. Like, once she pointed it out, I was like, yeah, I can see that that's a horrible decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of went through something similar with Shiner, because throughout the novel, in a few different places, there's these unfinished letters that Ruby's writing to her daughter. And my editors were kind of like wanting some resolution to them. Like, what did this mean? What was she going to say? And that same thing, like the whole point is that when somebody dies, you know, you don't get a second chance to know what they were going to tell you. And then there's that sort of like open space. And I just feel like that's so real when you're thinking about the people you love that came before you, or the people that you're researching. There's so much like white space, and you're just sort of left being like, what did this mean? You know, when you're trying to sort of like piece together the facts of a life to create some sort of like narrative, which is exactly, you know, what Kate was spending that summer doing, right?
Yeah, totally. It was important to me that there would be like some kind of lines or parts in there that like wouldn't recur, or that wouldn't like ever be fully explained, because I wanted the reader, as it sounds like you also wanted, to have that like frustration of understanding. But I also wanted it to be like an enjoyable reading experience. And so you kind of have to like balance the two. You're like, I want to frustrate them a little bit, but like, I don't want to, you know, completely turn them off. Like, and you want it to be clear that the frustration is kind of like purposeful, which I felt like came across, like that message with the letters in your book came across like really clearly to me. And one thing I wanted to ask you about that is a little bit kind of related, or sort of like the parallel to archives, is like the use of folklore in your book. I just thought it was like, I was so amazed by how perfectly it was like woven into this story. Like, you don't have like, there's like a bug around me, but but I've read books, and like some of them are great, but there's sort of like a folklore, you know, scene or moment, and then it like shifts into this like much harder realism, and then shifts into folklore. And I felt like one thing that was really amazing about Shiner was how it just sort of is kind of woven throughout. And so there are a lot of moments with things like the miracles that happen, where as a reader, you're like, is this, you know, really happening in the world of the book? Are we talking at the level of like folklore or myth? And I thought that it was just like really beautifully done, that I was like able to kind of suspend that knowing, which I feel like is really hard to do, to like it takes a lot of talent as a writer to be able to like have that suspension of knowledge and have your reader like buy into that. Were you all like, was the folklore ever like a bigger or smaller part of it? Did you ever, like, there's almost like a magical realism element to it. I don't know if you would use that word or not.
So it's interesting because, you know, so I grew up in not a snake handling church, and I didn't grow up, you know, in a place that's as isolated as this mountain in the novel, but I did grow up in a faith healing church, where miracles and mystery and things that you can't explain, it was just sort of like part of the playing field on a Sunday. And just people had all kinds of stories that boggled the mind. So that was sort of like the landscape of faith and the landscape of life as I first knew it, was that there was just magic and mystery everywhere you looked. And even though I was somebody who I couldn't speak in tongues, even though people around me were doing it, you know, I never prophesied that kind of thing, never wanted to. And it created this like real, I think, just gap or tension for me, like, can I have like an authentic faith if I don't practice it this way? And I think as I got older and I had to reckon with like, were those things real? And if they weren't, what does that mean about everything I've been taught? And so I think I wanted Ren to, who, you know, the 15-year-old girl, to have a similar kind of reckoning. That's kind of like, what does it mean to have like my own faith apart from this story that's living on my mountain? And I think what happens for Ren is that part of her finding kind of her own sense of self is sort of piecing together what parts of this mountain myth are just smoke and mirrors. And that can be like a really devastating journey to go on, because everything her father has given into this thing he believes in, it's, you know, cost a lot of things on his wife and his daughter. So there's a real benefit to everybody on the mountain kind of buying into it too, but it's not maybe some of it's real, but not all of it, I think is an actual evidence of like having faith, you know? So I think a lot of it is sort of mirrors like my kind of living in a similar situation, and then my leaving home and being like, oh, like other people don't experience life this way. What does that mean, you know?
That makes, go on. No, go on.
I was just gonna say, I think that that's sort of like an Appalachian sort of like way, is like communal storytelling, which is really beautiful. And I wanted that to come across in the book. And I also wanted to capture sort of the sacredness of living that kind of life, because so much about Appalachia is like, you know, like I read in the prologue, people think, oh, it means poverty. It means you're not educated. And, you know, those might be problems to be sure, but there's like just so much beauty. And even, I think even in, you know, some of these weird faith practices that people have. So I wanted to capture sort of that nice element instead of like, I wanted to get up inside of it, you know what I mean? And not just be like pointing the finger at it.
Yeah, I think like mind-boggling is the perfect word. Like that was, my mind felt boggled when I was reading it. But I think like, yeah, it's, you know, creating this sense of like wonder in a way. And I think that, you know, that makes sense that it for you was really about trying to kind of reckon with in literature, like something that you had grown up reckoning with or like seeing in a certain way, because I felt like there was so much authenticity and respect behind it that it felt like I was able as a reader to just wonder in this way that was really exciting for me. You know, like it didn't feel like I wasn't constantly like testing myself, like, oh, like did, you know, this really happen or this really happen? It didn't feel like I was like being forced to decide yes or no. It's sort of like going to this beautiful plane of wonder. And I really enjoyed that. I liked that a lot. And it's not something that I personally, you know, from my life associate with religion necessarily, but I do think that like a lot of writers, I have a very active imagination. And so I'm very, like, you know, just drawn to the idea of being able to like imagine kind of like multiple sort of realities or interpretations or like impossibilities. And I think it's really hard though to convey in fiction. I thought you did such a beautiful job.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's interesting, like sort of what you set out to do when you start a book and then sort of what becomes of it when you're done. And I think when I started the book, I wanted there to be this thing that happened that everybody called a miracle, but the main character knows is not. And what I think stayed true until the end. But then when I finished the book, what I realized that was such a gift to me was that there are real miracles in the book. It's just nobody's able to recognize them. And they come in sort of this flesh and blood love and sacrifice that the women have for each other. And that is every bit of a powerful miracle as, you know, whatever it is that a snake handling preacher does, or what it is that a moonshiner does when he like throws corn and water in a pot and lets it simmer and all of a sudden it becomes alcohol. I mean, I think that those are sort of these very real, very important everyday miracles that exist in the world.
Yeah, there's like this daring, there's like one image, which it comes from later in the book, but it's not spoiling anything. But like when like a young sort of child, Ivy, like ties all these gloves together and then lights them on fire on her head and then like falls back into snow and like extinguishes them. And if you like think through like the logic of events, it's like, okay, I mean, those all make sense as events, but the way that it's told, I was like reading, I was like, I don't know, like there was just something where I was like, did her hair just like light on fire? Like how did it was just like trying to like piece together this thing that actually was really, you know, remote, but it was this like act of daring, or sorry, it was very concrete, but it's also like this act of like daring that is much more abstract that I felt like really becomes the focus of like of that moment. Anyway, I thought that was a cool,
because
a cool section.
Sometimes, and this is sort of like maybe how it is with an archive too. There's like the story and then what becomes of the story, and you know the truth that happened, and then the story that people actually end up telling about it. And those are like not always the same thing, and there's like always this gap, I think. So like I said, you know, I loved that this was like a literary thriller that has a lot of heart and smarts. And I'm curious if you had to give just one piece of advice to somebody who's an aspiring thriller writer, what would you say, do you think? Maybe this is for me. Because it's really hard to write a page turner that is something that has layers to it, you know, that you can go back and think about. I mean, because I have thought so much since I read your book, about mental illness, which we can talk about archives, about women in art, that I'm just, I am curious what you think is a good tip for somebody who might just be starting out.
That's yeah, I'm so happy to hear that, you know, that it's been something that's like a space for continued reflection, because I feel like that's always just such a compliment as an author to hear that it has like provoked, you know, further thought and reflection. I will say, you know, there are a lot of people who like love the thriller genre who do not feel that Taking It Apart is a thriller. So there's like a little bit of like, you know, controversy over that. And so I guess I would just
use that term.
No, you're totally fine using it. I mean, I think I have a very capacious definition of thriller. And so to me, it's like more about like the mood and about like the kind of like unfolding of it, I guess. But it's not a book where there's like, you know, people are jetting between like, you know, like Greece and London, and like James Bond is like, you know, shooting it up or whatever. It's not that book. Those books are also great. I love an action film, but it's not quite like that. So just to say, I guess I would say my advice to thriller writers would just be based on like my very specific kind of thriller, I guess, that I write that some people don't feel is a thriller. But I do think that I think in terms of like the pacing and trying to like, you know, maintain interest, I would say a lot of that is just really thanks to my editor, you know, being like, is this part necessary? Like, I think I've really started to try to think of scenes as I'm telling them as like, well, what function is this scene serving in the course of like advancing, you know, these other elements or prompting further things, and like thinking about ways. This is something that I do think is, you know, more common for literary suspense or thrillers, is that a lot of the description or exposition will be like more wrapped into scenes rather than sort of like kind of more like having that be kind of the framework and kind of like dipping in and out of scenes. Like it's a more kind of like cinematic structure, if this makes sense. This might be being very like nitty gritty. So I guess just thinking about how to like externalize some of the conflicts and have them be, you know, conversations or actions between people in the way, you know, you might recommend for a screenwriter to do. I think that helps the plot advance in a way that is like more readable as suspense. I don't know if that's actually really good advice. I'm just thinking on my feet here, but it's certainly something I thought a lot about this book, was like how much of this scene can be summarized or like put into description, and how much of it should be like really a conversation that has tension and that is like moving forward. Yeah.
What do you think?
It's like a really nitty gritty response.
I feel like do you consider yourself a thriller writer?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have no problem. The only way that I wouldn't is that it does make me feel, you know, sad when people are like, oh, like I bought this thinking it was like a different kind of book, and then they're, you know, disappointed, and that's always, you know, sad. But I think there's so much great work happening right now in like the crime, mystery, thriller, suspense genre, and there's just so many talented authors who are doing such like really close like character work, thematic work, having these really like character driven stories, beautiful writing, that to me it's like a very fun space to be working in right now. And so I'd be like very proud to be considered a thriller writer. And I think like every year there's like more and more authors who sort of, can fall into that category of like a thriller with hearts and smarts, as you say, which I think is like a great way of describing it. Like Steph Cha, Elizabeth Little, Attica Locke, Tana French is like the ultimate queen. But there's just like so many really, really smart authors that are working in that space. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
It did, because I just, like I said, I think it's a genre. Maybe I just am so impressed when people are able to kind of weave things together and make you keep guessing, but not in like a cheap or artificial way. So when I think about doing that, I'm like, I just feel like that's so hard.
Well, it's so funny though, because I feel like Shiner has a lot of those elements of like the mystery, like we're trying to like kind of understand. I mean, I think it's part of like maybe the tension or like the mystery is just like trying to understand the characters and trying to understand them. But there is this sense of like, well, how did we end up at this place? There are some like terrible things that happen early in the book, and that then we're sort of trying to figure out like, well, how did we get here? And I feel like it's a similar sort of set of questions. So I think you'd be very well equipped to write a crime and mystery novel.
And I think what I'm trying to get across is sort of like, I mean, two things. I think one, there's such a push for us to have like propulsive storylines that kind of push forward. But sometimes I feel like the most interesting storylines kind of are pushing back, going back in time, because that's, so for somebody who lives with trauma, you're kind of sort of ever present circling, right? And I think that putting that on the page in a way where the structure reflects what that life is like, I think it can be really satisfying for reader, for something you've experienced in your life, to see characters sort of say, oh, this thing is like coming around again, and then I think the other thing is too, like if there's family secrets, if there's these juicy secrets, like I kind of wanted each section of the book to feel like, you're sitting down with another relative who is like, oh, you think that's what happened? Like, let me set you straight. Because I feel like that's what happens. When you talk to your grandmother about like one thing, and then your grandpa's like, oh, no, because everybody holds a different piece of the truth, and trying to get at the truth, it exists in those cracks, right? Where, people have come away from the same set of facts with a completely different interpretation of them.
Yeah, I was talking to Alexis Shaitkin, who wrote this great book, Saint X, which is another thriller that is very smart, very beautifully written, and has some really great characters. I was talking to her today, and we were talking about how like both of our books have these characters who are like obsessed with pursuing the truth and kind of like trying to determine the truth in a pretty like evidence-driven way. Like that, I think both her main character and Kate, the archivist in Take Me Apart, are like very much believe, if we can just get these facts, everything will be, figured out. Like everything will be sort of like situated and all my problems will be solved. And there's like such a desire for the truth. And I think that what they end up, I think both realizing is that truth is much more slippery, that there are a lot of interpretations. And I think that slipperiness like comes up even more centrally like in Shiner. And it's interesting because I feel like, Ren, who's like the character who we start from her point of view, she doesn't necessarily have like that like evidence. Like, she's not like, oh, I'm going to assemble all the evidence. Like I feel like her mode of investigation is like a little bit different. It's like kind of like a probing, like asking questions rather. And she's very like, she really wants to like sort of see things, I feel like, but it's kind of a different, like I like that there's this like fluidity of like moving between versions of the truth, and that slipperiness really, I feel like, comes through in Shiner in a way I thought was really beautiful. Yeah. And like, I guess I felt like I had this idea, through reading it, a lot of moments where I was like, I felt you were beautifully capturing that sometimes, having the facts is not really enough, or is not like the core of it, right? It's kind of all of the emotion and like the sort of sum of the story.
Yeah. It's interesting because so the first book I wrote was a memoir, which is obviously was me telling the truth. And it is also about what it's like to be a young woman who has to keep a secret and the reverberations of that, in a life, in a community. And then, when I finished that and I was super sick of myself, I wanted to write about other people, but I think I still was really captured by this notion of what does it mean to tell a true story? And what does it look like to care about the truth? And what does it mean when everybody's version of that truth doesn't match? And then you're kind of left, feeling like I'm living in this like slippery, reality because, when you publish a memoir, I had some people say, oh, you got it right, who lived through the same thing that I did. And then I had some people say, oh, I think you got it wrong. So, and it was like, we were all there. We all experienced, the same. People just sort of like step away from it with different things. And, I've had a lot of people ask me, if I get offended, if people think that like Ren is some sort of me, if things happen to Ren. And I had sort of this reverse experience where it was like people questioned whether my memoir was true versus, so I'm like, I don't care if you think that I wrote about myself and Ren. It matters more that I told you that, my first book was like the truth. So I think it's interesting how like your life and the things that you're thinking about in your life can kind of like show up on the page, in interesting ways, even when you're like not writing by yourself,
I was wondering, I haven't read Cinderland yet, although now it's next on my list after Shiner, but I was wondering like what the difference would, like what it was like for you writing each book, the differences in between like writing a memoir and writing a novel, and also like the differences of like not just like marketing it, but like that, the process of like going public with it. I'm just so daunted by the idea of writing a memoir, by like having to understand my own life well enough, and then also by the idea of then putting it out there. And I'm just like so amazed by people can do it. Did you feel like writing Shiner gave you a different perspective on that process, or had you kind of like put Cinderland and like the memoir experience to bed when you wrote this?
I never ever thought I would write a memoir, and it was sort of this like gift that came to me, I think, at the right time. And there were just some things I hadn't reckoned with really in an important way in my past. And I think I was trying to write stories, but I could see when I would look at what I was writing that there was this thing, this secret that I'd kept for this long time. And I could see it in my work and how I was sort of like going like this. And the reason that was is because that's what I was doing in my life, as I was like swerving around things. And I think I sort of got to a point where I was like, what if I don't swerve? What if I stop swerving? What comes out? And I had a teacher ask me, where are you from? Tell me where you're from. And Cinderland became, a very long answer to that question. And I've heard a lot of writers who write both fiction and memoir, fiction, nonfiction, say that the process is the same. But for me, it just was night and day, just because I think of the risk that I took, of the story that I told in Cinderland. I don't think that you can recreate that in fiction, nor should you have to.
Yeah.
So I think that there's something really special about the form of memoir where you're setting a contract with your reader that says, what I'm about to tell you is as true as I can tell it, as straight as I can tell it. And I did that. And I think because I did that, it sort of like freed up all this other emotional terrain for me to explore in a joyful way that I don't think I would have if I hadn't sort of like let Cinderland lay the groundwork. And because fiction just lives in possibility, which I love. There's so much to explore because you can, reach to different perspectives, which is something, we both did, with Cinderland. It was like, there's court documents in Cinderland, but it's pretty much just me. So there's something really freeing about being like, what might other people have to say about something? And what might other people find funny? That, that kind of thing that just like it gives you room to breathe.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think what's cool is that I feel like, my nonfiction or my memoiristic work is in conversation with my fiction work, but I just feel like the bounds are very different, and sort of the agreement that you're setting with the reader is very different. So I think that I hope that they complement each other, and I hope that they continue to complement each other. I would imagine, what is it like for you when you're switching between, your academic work versus fiction? Do you feel like, is it similar, or or do you sort of keep them in their own kind of compartments?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because for a long time I was doing like them very separately. I was like pursuing this academic career, and I was like secretly writing fiction. And then I signed with my agent, and that's when I was like, oh, I should like tell people, I guess, or like now I like felt like I had to tell people. And
were they surprised?
Like
what was that like?
Yeah, so people were really surprised. I think I think people were very surprised, although I was, I had been really worried about telling, like the faculty in my program and things like that. Mm-hmm. I was worried that they would think I was taking my actual work less seriously. I say actual work because at the time I was only being paid to do academic work and not being paid to do any writing at that time. And I was worried that they wouldn't think I wasn't taking it seriously enough, but they were actually really supportive, which I think is also because I was like, in an English department where we all like love books a lot. That's why we like, get PhDs in English and like talk about it and teach books. And so, there's a lot of like excitement and supportiveness that was wonderful. But anyway, so they were like really separate for me. And then kind of like, it was, maybe I hadn't thought about this, but maybe it is a little bit similar to how you sort of like felt like there was this like free terrain suddenly for you to like write in a new way. I felt like being able to like admit that these were like these two halves of my work and my life allowed me to kind of think of them in concert and in connection in a way that has been really exciting, so that like I feel like I have learned so much from my academic analysis, like just about story structure and like thinking about it in a particular way. And I've also learned a lot about, like, I think my academic work has been really influenced by me thinking about craft more, because like there's kind of this tradition right now, and like in literary academia is like you kind of just look at everything as like outside of the author, it's just sort of like a historical document. And so having to think about craft has kind of changed my perspective on that. So they've informed each other, but then at the same time they are very separate in my head, because it's not like I like go down to write and I'm like, how can I like apply this academic principle or that I learned or something, and it's just not like that at all. They're just kind of like two parts of my brain that kind of come out in some way. But I think the biographical thing is interesting because I was very, nervous about Take Me Apart coming out. I guess like still am in some ways, because there's a lot of really difficult material in there, and that I felt there would be a lot of pressure to be like, which parts of this are biographical, because I think that's often a question that people ask of female authors in particular. I think there's a lot of desire to know, what is real, what's not real, how could you possibly know something? And I think that's been hard, and it's like it hasn't, been an issue in terms of doing interviews and things like that the way I feared it would be, but it is a little bit it's a little scary, I guess, for me, because I guess I don't want to have to talk about my work at least like those really difficult elements of my work super biographically. But there's some like very difficult material in there. So I don't know.
And I think, it brings up that question of what we owe a reader when they read our work. And it's easy to, reading a book is such an intimate act that I think sometimes it's easy for a reader to make that jump to say, well, let's, I want all your secrets now, because they sort of had this book of like these character secrets, and it's a real journey to be like, I have to like find my line. With Cinderland, it came out 5 years ago, and still when I know I'm going to have to talk about it, I have to I set a half hour before and I'm by myself and I have to give myself a real talk about, so I find my center before I do it. Even now, years, because it's a real challenge, because, you want to bring your most authentic and your most generous self to your readers, but at the same time, you don't want it to like be wearing away at your privacy, so that's important to protect too. And there's no guidebook for that. It's sort of like you can only figure out what you need by doing it wrong, I think.
I think that makes a lot. I also will say, like, I think that I then, I did try a little, when I was like already sensing that this would be something that was like difficult for me with writing, Take Me Apart. I did also kind of use the book, I think, to think through some of those, because a big sort of tension in the book is like Miranda is a very private person and a very famous artist and feels that people don't have a right to know things about her, and that they shouldn't have to know things about her in order to understand her artwork. So like there's a lot of debate a lot of scholarly debate in this like fictional world about whether some of her photographs are real and whether they're actually photographs of self-harm, and she's sort of like, doesn't matter, like, why do you need to know that in order for the art to have meaning? And so I do feel like I was able to sort of think through some of those questions in the book in a way that felt like I was, engaging with my fear, I guess, in that way.
And I think, one of the questions I had written down here was that, mental illness is portrayed in the novel with such breathtaking care in a way I don't think I've ever seen in fiction. And that meant a lot to me. And because I feel like it mirrors what it is actually like in real life. And you're like, how much do I let people know about me? If I do have like a secret I don't want to share, or if I do have a history with mental illness, like we all, Miranda is experiencing it on a really grand scale because she's this artist and people want a piece of her, but everybody kind of experiences that in their own sort of private way of like, how much am I going to let somebody know about what's real about me? And what do you, in regard to, mental illness and art, and perhaps what it means to be a woman, what do you hope readers come away with after they've finished the book?
I think that, in terms of representing mental illness, I think it was important for me to show that it is a really painful experience that can have a lot of pain for, the ill person and for the people around them. And also that it's not in and of itself like the entirety of someone, like I think there's kind of, sort of two sort of trends or two ways that mental illness is often represented in literature and film and TV. And one is this kind of like really like spectacular kind of, just like kind of like, it's kind of gross in a lot of ways, it's sort of like sensationalized and it's made into this thing like, sort of like, let's just sort of like watch them suffer and see like how hard and visceral their life can be. And like, that's how I want to show like the extremity of it. It's not limited to women, but there's like, I think just in general, sort of an intensity about that. But then on the other hand, I feel like, maybe more in the last 10 years, there's been a kind of trend toward saying, like mental illness is normal. It's part of everyday life. And like, it's easy to fix. And, and there's especially kind of a thing that's like, like don't do medication. Like there's kind of this weird stigmatization of medication in the service of like normalizing mental illness in some way. And so I think that there are parts of both of those that are perspectives that are valid and that are meaningful for the people who are creating those accounts. But I wanted it to be balanced and I wanted it to feel to show that something can be painful and also generative. I think that's the one thing that Kate and Miranda both have in common in dealing with their illness is that there are positives for them in their illness. And that's something that's really difficult for them because there's also a lot of pain and trying to understand how to, they obviously have this desire to like get all of the positives and none of the pain. But trying to just grapple with that being a really complex experience for individuals. And also it was important for me to show that it is really hard for families and loved ones as well, because there just can be like a difficulty of understanding that creates more pain on both sides.
Yeah, and I think I so appreciate hearing your thoughts on it, because I think as I was reading it, it moved me so much to see this just fully living, breathing account of what it is like, the ups and the downs. And I think another thing that the characters did for one another, even in their own limited ways, was to say, for Kate, for example, to just have people around her that see it and that they just remain, they're there and they see it. And I felt like for me, that just was such a moving thing to take part in as a reader. Because that's something that I've wondered about in my own life, is like, what if people see the parts of me that I don't want them to see, then what happens? And I feel like I was able to witness Kate reckon with that and sort of have people that remain around her, even though they don't get it right,
Yeah, there's definitely, and I think that's also something that, Kate, without giving away too much about the end of the book, but I do think that, Kate really benefits from having a small network, but a network of people who are really do care about her a lot and are making a real effort to understand her and to like also actually help her through what she's going through, even if they don't know how. And I think what becomes so hard for Miranda is almost, not the illness itself that she's experiencing, but the total lack of support that she has, like complete evisceration of support. And that, I think, actually is, what ends up becoming more dangerous for her than the illness itself.
Yeah.
Ooh,
I love the end too. For all of you who are watching, it has a great ending too.
Oh, good. I'm glad you say that. I appreciate that. My mom did tell me that it had the best ending of any book ever. So,
hey, I will say,
unbiased review.
My mom said, she read it and she said, these are the things I liked, and then whatever. And then at the end, of the text she sent me, she said, but snakes, Amy, ew.
That's so good. I love that.
So I know we have maybe, 13.
Like a few minutes left for questions.
I don't know if there are questions, but I did want to know, can you tell us anything? I know you have a second novel with FSG. Do you want to talk about it? Do you want to not want to talk about it?
No, I don't want to talk about it, but I am really excited about it. And I think that, if you like Take Me Apart, hopefully, you'll like it too. But I do feel like I'm finally at a moment where I feel like I fully have grasped it, like just the last couple of weeks. And that's like a really exciting moment. I mean, I haven't finished it, but I feel like I really understand it now. That's very exciting. So yeah. What about you?
So I'm sort of the same. I mean, I am working on something new, but I've realized I sort of have to work for like a solid year and a half on something and not have any idea what it's about. Like I couldn't even give you, and that's actually an important part of my process, to sort of be so confused about what the heck is coming out of me in my notebook for a full year. But what I'm working on now, it's a story about a meteor that hits a very small town where a famous folk singer disappeared some years earlier. And it's about how her life kind of intertwines with one of the young women who witnesses the meteor. And so witnesses the meteor hit the ground. So, but it's a lot about some of the same things in Shiner, untold women's stories. It's a lot about music, the power of music and memory. And so it's been a real joy to work on here and there when I can in these really crazy times. And not always able to work. I don't know about you, but
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any children at home, so that definitely, creates a little more freedom in the day, but there's a lot happening. It can be difficult to get any productive writing done, for sure.
And so, I mean, I guess if anybody has any questions, you could pop them in the chat box, but I do have some more questions.
I also have more questions for you, so this is great. Well, I'm going to ask you a question, which is about, you've talked already about the idea of wanting to show how strong these women were, and this idea of strength. I mean, I guess I just want to sort of hear you talk a little bit about the idea of a strong woman, because I feel like it's such an archetype now, and the kind of strong female character, but then sometimes it becomes clear that people are they actually want a very specific type of strength from their character, and it's interesting. I guess I just trying to think, I don't know. Anyway, just what do you think about the idea of a strong woman as a kind of literary archetype? And were you trying to sort of challenge or question anything about that in writing Shiner?
Yeah, I mean, so I did think about that a lot, because I think what has happened in the past in literature is that, and then maybe not so much right now, but it's been this sort of thing, there's a strong woman in a book when she acts like a man.
Yes,
and takes on a man's hero's journey. And when I was starting the book, I thought, that is a story I could tell. I could tell a story about women becoming moonshiners and bootleggers and skirting the law, and it would have been a great book. Absolutely. It is a book I'd love to read. So if anybody out there wants to write it, I will read it and love it. But I think what I was personally wanting to go after is what it means when strength looks like losing. And because I just feel like that is such a real part of maybe making hard choices or living a life where you have limited access to things, where you're isolated. And I think where I landed with that is that I'm not sure people are ever, just strong or weak. I think we have moments of strength and moments of weakness. And I think what I also kind of wanted to get across was where we gather strength from. And is it a worthy source, right? And for the women in the book, Ruby and her best friend Ivy, their relationship is the most stable thing on that mountain. No matter what the preacher is selling, that relationship is the thing everybody looks to for some sort of sense of stability. And it's what Ren looks to is for what it means to be a woman. And it's, she sees these women who are both strong women by that definition, but we've got one, Ruby stays in the lines and Ivy steps outside the lines. And we see that, really it's those lines that are the problem. And so over the course of the novel, what happens with that friendship is it becomes this ultimate act of resistance against who is holding power on that mountain. And that is an act of strength that I think Ren herself gathers strength from.
I feel like, sorry, there's this mosquito that's flying just in front of my face. But I do think that it is also Ruby and Ivy's friendship is such that, there are moments when they make a choice that is strong in the sense that it is, very conscious. They know what they're doing. But they're the only ones who understand kind of what's at stake in that choice. Yeah. And so they're kind of each other's only witness in that sense. And in a lot of ways. But I guess I'm just thinking of, one thing that Ruby does in the middle of the book where I was as a reader, you're disappointed that that's what she decided. You're I wish that isn't what had happened. And you can tell that to the outside characters, it looks like she's just kind of giving up or she's just going with the flow. But with Ivy, she's able to have this kind of openness where they understand I mean, maybe not always fully, but they can kind of understand like why and where that is coming from, and that's like a more active choice. And I thought that was like a really beautiful testament to friendship and wholeness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thank you for saying that, because I think I was trying to put on the page what strength might look like at times when you are living a hidden life and when that has kind of been your choice.
Mm-hmm.
And then to also find strength in being like, maybe I didn't make the right choice. Like, I feel like even that act takes a bit of courage, right? To be like, maybe, I did not set myself on the right path here.
Yeah.
Now what? Like, that's a very scary truth to admit, I think.
Yeah, it's terrifying. And I think that there's a regretful feeling in a lot of Shiner. And I think like a lot of like there's a mournful feeling about it, even though it's also this like celebration in so many ways. But instead, it's not like, I guess, a story where the characters are like so mired in their regrets that they can't move forward. Maybe except Flynn. I feel like Flynn has a hard time. But I certainly feel like Ruby is like, she regrets a lot, but she's like, but this, yeah, like you're saying, this is what she's chosen. And that really came through. And it was really interesting. Yeah.
What do you think, now that you've, finished taking apart, it's out in the world, like when you look back at those characters that you created in your mind and heart, like, what do you feel like they taught you or gave you?
Oh, wow. I haven't thought of it that way. Wow. I haven't like thought of it, I guess, that way. I mean, I think of like, there's definitely certain like, in writing, elements of each character, there are like moments where, there was like a kind of level of like honesty. I had to like level up or something. And like, I had to like get up, you're like, oh, I have to like get over this hurdle and be like fully honest and truly like transparent at this moment. And I think like the process of doing that for each, character, I think it's like admitting like, a limitation or flaw about yourself. And I think that's like a real learning experience for me. I think just trying to, I don't know. I'm going to have to think about it a little bit more, because I do think I certainly learned a lot through the course of writing a book, but I haven't thought specifically about like what I've learned from writing each character.
Yeah.
Do
And
you
plus,
have an answer?
I was going to say, I think this experience too of publishing a book right now is, not what it might have been. There's been a lot of other things to like consider. I mean, I guess I've been thinking a lot about, like I'd mentioned before, I think this concept of looking for real miracles in my own life. I think that was something that, when I finished the book and sort of looked at it as a whole, it was something that I had sort of like left breadcrumbs for myself to sort of say like, if I'm looking for like some capital M miracle to sort of appear, I'm missing all these things that are around me, just sort of everyday miracles. So, and I think that's something that the women in particular in the book sort of realize or face. I think Flynn,
that's so beautiful. I love that.
I think part of that comes when you have people read a book and kind of repeat back to you what they see that you've done in the book. And I had somebody say, to me, there are miracles in this book. And it just was like this light bulb went off, and I was like, that's so true. And then what a gift it was for me in my own life to be like, let me try to look anew at some of my circumstances that I'm like frustrated with.
Yeah. Like the thing that is the most like spectacular or eye-catching, or that people are telling, like, stories about down the mountain, are not going to always be the things that are actually the most miraculous. Yeah. I feel like that's a really good note to end on.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. This was awesome. Oh, yay, Maddie's back.
Maddie.
Thank you both. That was such a great conversation, and I really appreciate you going deep in depth. This is such a cool platform, and it's been great listening to you. So thank you both for being here tonight.
Oh yeah, thank you so much for hosting. Yeah, I know I went quite deep on the craft, so me, Joe, and I will continue the conversation later. Thanks everybody for coming.
Craft talk.
Oh, good. Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, it's fun for us too.
Yeah, and thank you for bearing with me with the technical difficulties. I appreciate it. So
yeah, we rolled with it. All right, everyone. Well,
thank you so much, Maddie. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see